Salve Discipuli. Thank you for checking in on this recorded lesson, in which I'm going to try to carry on our work in chapter 9, just a little bit more about Cicero and Catiline, um, the phrase of the day relevant to that, and then onwards into giving my best explanation of the fourth conjugation to add to what you read and learned in the textbook. Um, Previously. So, onwards. I'm going to go back to this the photograph of the painting by Macari that we were looking at yesterday, and that you have found in the textbook. Um, and what I'd like to do is quickly tell you that Macari painted this based on his impression of what Sallust and Cicero had to say about that first confrontation with Catiline there on November 8th in 63 BC. But his impression, it was in a couple of different ways wrong. Big picture, the the Senate was not meeting in the Curia. It was not meeting in the Senate House on that day. It was actually meeting in a temple. Um, the precinct of the temple was opened to add a degree of sanctity and religious significance to this event, this confrontation with Catiline. Second thing that's a missed impression is the appearance of Cicero um, compared to the appearance of Catiline. Cicero, you probably have observed, is the fellow standing there to the left of the image. I'm going to see if I can bring up a pointer. Yeah, Cicero, right over here, with his hands raised as he is exclaiming, "We must presume, O tempora, O mores." Catiline over here on the right, seated and looking downwards and with his arms kind of bowed or hunched in discomfort. Um, he is presented there. And if you compare the two figures, you would have the impression that Catiline is a vigorous, strong young man, uh, and that Cicero was an older, maybe more bent, bowed, at least in stature, man. Um, One of those impressions is wrong. And the fact is that Catiline was actually 2 years older than Cicero at the time that these events happened. Actually, all throughout uh, Cicero's life, Catiline was 2 years older than him. And so the impression that Macari, the painter, has given you of Cicero as an old man is perhaps due to the fact that Cicero lived to the age of 63, um, well, 64 actually, no, 63. Whereas Catiline died there at the age of a vigorous young man. He was a mere 45 years old when the conspiracy was detected and he was confronted and died. Other elements of the painting are valid in the sense of the description of the other senators avoiding Catiline as if he were carrying the plague or the coronavirus or the conspiracy virus. Um, that's accurate. But when we look at art, it's important to realize that the artist's impression, the artist's imagination, sometimes takes over for what we know from history. So, apologies there for kind of monologuing about it, but I did want to address that with you all. Onwards to a phrase of the day, actually two. I want to remind you of this old one that harkens to the moment when the Roman Republic was born, when Tarquinius Superbus had been expelled from power as the last king of Rome. And the Romans adopted a new form of government called the Republic. And that's relevant to today's phrase of the day, which is new, but connects to material that we began to explore with Chapter Nine's vocabulary and the position in Rome of the consul. Um, um, you're going to hear more about this in just a moment, but the quotation comes from a couple of different ancient sources who tell us that the name of this elected position, the position of consul, came from what the consuls primarily did. It's incorporated into this phrase of the day. Consules consulunt populum et senatum de patria. And I'm asking you to infer what consulunt means. Yes, there is a clear English derivative. And yes, that clear English derivative is also related to the term consul as an elected official in Rome. Translation of the phrase is the consuls consult the people and the Senate regarding the country. I want you to step back from the notion of kings. Kings in a monarchy often make laws or force laws to be made. They can act as um, judge, jury, and executioners in trial. Kings generally will lead the country's military forces. And when the kings were expelled, the Romans didn't want someone that had all that power bound up in his or her identity, and especially didn't want that power bound up in the same person year after year after year. The Romans knew that idea of absolute power corrupts those who hold it. So in the Republic, at the top of Rome's elected officials, there were numerous elected officials, but at the top there were two consuls. They were elected annually. They shared power during their year of office. And together, serving as a sort of check and balance upon each other, they served as this chief civilian and military executives. Um, that means they execute the laws and they also execute the decisions of the Senate and the people, expressed in different types of votes. So, just to clarify this about the Republic, these high elected officials, they were not mini kings. They could not act absolutely independently. Um, in fact, one consul could veto the decisions of the other. They had to take turns sharing power on a month by month basis. So um, I could monologue for a long time, but I just wanted you guys to have that insight into the background of that high elected office. Um, Last thing I want to say, think about this. Um, when Catiline conspired to overthrow Rome's government, he was in his mid 40s, a couple years older than Cicero, who was 43, actually 42 as a candidate for consul. And one of the things that was kind of driving Catiline is a sense of indignation, but also a sense that since he'd already stood as a candidate for consul twice and been defeated, his chances of winning were not that great. The Romans didn't always like to, how do I want to say this, elect older people to the position of chief official in the state. Anyway, I'm going to get moving on. Um, this slide is a reminder, a refresher about what we learned in the third conjugation to form the third conjugation. I wanted to put this in front of you. Remember, you can pause the video at any time to look over and refresh on how the third conjugation was different than the first and second conjugation. These were some of the unique aspects that we observed about the third conjugation, and that resulted in what you see on this slide, the forms in the present tense, active, passive, and infinitives, where we had this funky bridge vowel I and also the bridge vowel U. showing up in places that we hadn't used those vowels before. So that was the third conjugation. With the fourth conjugation, as a quick grammar check, um, if you recall from the textbook, the infinitive is different from that of the third conjugation in that it ends in a long IRE. If we take the sample verb sentiō, sentire, the infinitive ends, there should be an E there. It ends in long IRE. This is a similarity to the first and second conjugation, which both have long vowels before the RE. How is the present stem different? Well, it's different from the third conjugation, where we did something other than this. But for a fourth conjugation, we go back to the same process we did for first and second conjugation verbs, dropping the RE from the infinitive. So from sentiō, sentire, dropping off the RE, we get the present stem senti. There's an asterisk there because there are going to be places where we're going to shorten the I at the end of senti. But as a pure stem, the stem includes the macron, long I. Other diffs or differences? Well, this is kind of a bridge. I don't want to use that word. Um, Kind of a similarity between the fourth conjugation and the third. There's going to be the letter U appearing as a bridge vowel, but it only appears in front of the third person plural forms. Otherwise, we're not going to need bridge vowels for the fourth conjugation. The presence of the U is reminiscent of third conjugation verbs. It sets the fourth conjugation apart from the first and second. So the fourth is I don't want to say a hybrid, but it's got some similarities to the first and second conjugation, long vowel RE in the infinitive, long vowel ending the stem, but it also carries over a trait from the third conjugation, that bridge vowel long U. Now, I'd like you to consider pausing the video and writing out the forms in the active and passive voice in the present tense for sentiō, sentire. If you don't pause the video, to do that and to check your work when I start revealing the forms, at least pause the video or orally say them aloud prior to their appearance. Sentiō, sentire means feel, as printed in the textbook. I also encourage you guys to consider the meaning perceive, because sentiō is used not just for feeling with one's sense of touch, but for perceiving in one's heart or perceiving based on observation. So I'm going to use the meaning perceive here. As we go through the active voice forms, I'm going to reveal them one at a time. I perceive sentiō. Notice at the moment the macron is not in front of the, there's not a macron over the I. The asterisk here is just marking it as a form where the I is short, just as it is in the first principal part of sentiō up here, short I-O, sentiō. You perceive, sentis. She perceives or he perceives, sentit. Again, it's a short I. The Romans didn't like long vowel sounds in front of certain verb endings, t, nt, ntur, and so on. The macrons are your friends, but don't freak out about them. Okay. Onwards, we perceive, sentimos. Y'all perceive, sentitus. They perceive, sentiunt. To perceive, the infinitive, sentire. On the passive side, um, we're going to use those passive endings that we're familiar with, are, res, tur, mur, mini, untur. We're going to have um, the same process that we've used in the past, except we're going to notice the presence of another bridge vowel, just as we have a bridge vowel in front of the ending nt. We'll have one over here in the third person plural. But first, I am perceived, sentior. You are perceived, sentires. He, she, or it is perceived, sentitur. And yes, the macron belongs there. We are perceived, sentimur. All are perceived, sentimini. They are perceived, sentiuntur. It's going to be the combination of the I from the stem and U as a bridge vowel, sentiuntur, just there as there is on the active side there with sentiunt. Finally, the infinitive, to be perceived, that form would be sentiri. Sentiri. It may feel a little funny to say it, but it's a solid Latin passive infinitive. All right. Before I quit out of this and send you on to the task for the day, let me encourage you fine folks. Please consider your ability to translate these forms, not just to form them, but to translate them into English. So, of the forms that you see, which one means we perceive? That's right, it's sentimos. Which form means you are perceived? That's right, sentires, or potentially sentimini. It's sometimes difficult in English to differentiate between you singular and you plural, and I was kind of tricky there and did not differentiate. Right, two more quickly. Which is the form that means they perceive? Correct, that's sentiunt over here. And now, the final one, I'd like to ask you which form means they are perceiving? They are perceiving. Yep, you're right. It's sentiunt again. That was tricky. Okay. We're still developing super confidence with the difference between active and passive voice. Sentiunt means potentially they perceive, they do perceive, or they are perceiving. On the passive side, sentiuntur would mean they are perceived. They are being perceived. So the difference would be the girls perceive the ghost in the hallway. On the other hand, the ghosts, plural, are perceived by nobody. Over here, that would be sentiuntur. Okay, going kind of long-winded here. I'm going to wrap it up and stop recording. I encourage you fine folks to move on to the tasks, where it's the formation and translation of a variety of Latin verbs, mostly of the fourth conjugation. All right, ciao, folks.